what is the wonder of wonder?
Fear of failure prevents us from reaching our full potential.
We need to pave the way for them to ask why.
Curiosity gives us 9 lives.
Marked with a low grade, the inevitable talk happens.
And you're teaching kids to hate maths. And that's very, very sad.
And then you try again.
It's never too late.
It's my mission to sort of defend that curiosity.
Never believe a prediction that doesn't empower you.
But hopefully, along this little journey, I've managed to inspire a little wonder in you as well.
Great, well, welcome everybody. As I say, sending you all very positive vibes for today. Really appreciate you taking the time out to join us all. My name is Sam Reeder. I'm one of the co-founders here at WONDR, and we're a social learning platform that's bringing people together around some of the biggest topics we feel that are affecting our industries and our lives at this time. And we believe in the power of community to bring people together on kind of live discussions, really, to share what we're all working on and connect, because these topics need a bit more attention than can be found typically just in a book or a course. And so we like to try and connect real world situations and real world people like yourselves with what's going on. And we're on the journey of building a platform around this. So it's really a tool to bring people together to connect and learn and collaborate around these topics, ultimately to grow careers and to help everyone go towards their ambitions with impact in the world. A few topics we're starting with at the moment over the next couple of months will be, circularity, climate change, and again, Rachel can go into this in a bit more detail, but the sustainable fashion and sustainable business ecosystems and the incubator you're building, Rachel, around how we help people equip themselves with tackling these topics. We may move into others during the rest of the year, and part of what I'd love to hear from you all is what sort of topics are you looking to learn about? What topics are you looking to explore? What challenges do you have in your businesses or your own personal careers? And we're here to support you on that journey. Not to dwell on this too much, but we fully recognise the power of community learning towards how we're going to equip each other with the skills and the mindsets that we need to transform industry, which are big terms, and we need to break that down so it's not overwhelming. But we truly believe in small actions, collective action can generate huge impact, and that's why it's exciting to have you all here today with us. Just a bit of housekeeping, if you wouldn't mind keeping on mute just whilst we're recording the sessions and hearing from the mentors. But you can find everyone through the app as well. So you can find on the room button on the app the attendees, and you can see each other's profiles and get a bit more of a feel for who's in the room and what we're all working on. And feel free to use the chat in Zoom and on WONDR as well. But I will stop sharing from my side. And maybe, Rachel, if you'd like to introduce a bit more about what you're doing and the fantastic work you're involved in with the ecosystem. We're collaborating with you at the moment and really proud to be part of that journey with you.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to try and share the screen because I do have a thing. Here we go. So nice to meet everyone. And yeah, I am Rachel Sheila Can, founder of the Ecosystem Incubator, which is a collaborative. So that means we're bringing together smaller businesses from all across the whole of the fashion industry. That might be from the grower right through to someone who's in a retail shop, and we have them collaborate. My experience is I have like 23 years in design and development to design management, and I really saw what was happening on the ground in sustainability. We collaborate with WONDR, of course, on growing our community platform, the joint venture company, and Ethical AI. Our ecosystem is founded on the metaphor of a forest, that no one tree in the forest can be a forest alone. So no one business can be a forest, and that all of the players within the system share nutrients. And those nutrients might be money, those nutrients might be intelligence, networks, and people that you know, so that we can actually start to nurture each other towards the greater goal. This is my wonderful drawing of the ecosystem itself and how that's split up. So we work in small self-organizing niches that come together in various different ways to co-create. So we might be doing co-creation on bottom-up co-creation. We might be doing co-marketing, and many aspects came out of our design thinking. The ecosystem itself was founded by me, but it's created by you. So the people who join it actually co-create it, and we did a lot of design thinking before we even opened the doors to actually put what people wanted into their seeds. And Ken was one of those people that came in the first place, and I'm happy to say he was our first collaborator in the ecosystem itself. So we live in this economic system, and of course there has to be benefits to people joining and collaborating together. So for people who aren't in the fashion industry, it might be a bit difficult to understand some of the terms, but essentially we're bunching up on ordering larger quantities of fabric together so we can reduce overproduction, and then have each of those designers and brands or entities have a more agile run of what they're doing. We're doing co-circulation. We're doing co-marketing, where we might all come together as one, and we're doing this in the kids' wear space to start off with, to do a trial on how we can come together and have a greater retail offer together. We're looking at co-distribution over time when we're building into our locality locations, thinking about the product afterlife, how we could recirculate that back into the system. We have a great collaborator in Anu who's actually been recycling for wool, post-consumer wool for over 40 years. And you can listen to all of our great members on our podcast as well, and I'll put all the details in the chat. The ecosystem itself is moving away from a hierarchical structure. I am not the person at the top, the CEO, smoking my cigar and taking all of the money from the people in that system. It's a living, breathing system as if it was a forest. So I will put all of the links in the chat, and I do have after this, if you go back onto the WONDR space, I do have a full introduction every Friday at 2 o'clock. Just to say as well, we have just been highlighted as ones to watch in the Drapers Fashion Awards, which is a industry, UK industry fashion platform. So I'm going to stop that, and I'm going to introduce, let me just stop share, introduce the wonderful Ken Alston, who was our first member and collaborator of the Ecosystem Incubator. He has been in circularity for a super long time and exactly knows what he's talking about. So with no further ado, I'm going to introduce and ask Ken to come to the stage. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Rachel and Sam, for introducing me and for setting up this event today. I'm really quite excited to share just some thinking with you today, and hope that it stimulates more thinking for all of you. I have been in this space for quite a while, as I'll explain as I go along. As much as anything today, I'm just going to take you through a little bit of my evolution and how I think in this space. I have a mechanistic sort of process that I follow, and I'm going to share you some elements of that so you can get a sense of it. So let me move on here. So my links go back to the UK. You can probably tell from my accent, I'm originally from the UK, although those in the UK tell me I do have a slight American accent now, having been here for 30 years. But back in the eons of time, in the early 70s, I was in West London in Uxbridge University, this wonderful modern concrete jungle. And while I was there, I bought a book, and that book was Rachel Carson's Silent Spring. It had nothing to do with any coursework. There was nothing thinking about, there were no environmental courses, no sustainability courses. Nobody was talking about circularity. It's just a book that spoke to me on the shelf in the student bookstore. And it took me 20 years to realize, when I actually packed up my things from the UK, moved to the US, and unpacked them all again, I rediscovered this book that I bought in 1972. And it suddenly hit me that the thinking behind this book had been stuck in my brain all of this time, and it had been infiltrating and affecting everything I did. And of course, the idea was fundamentally that as humans, the things we do can have an impact on the wider world, and a deleterious impact at that. And that idea that everything I did in my life, in work, in life, It could have a negative impact, sort of stuck with me. And so it just, I don't know, that seed sprouted and germinated, and I've been working in this space and thinking this way for all of this time. The last 22 years, I've been speaking and consulting on what we now call the circular economy, but back then it didn't have a trendy name. And all of this time, we've been seeking this elusive thing called sustainability. And I want to start with that idea, because we're still unsustainable, right? The origins of this go back now, to 1987, 35 years. And we all trot out this wonderful statement of what sustainable development is. And of course, we all agree with it because it makes sense. We can't have a big party today and mess up the world for our kids and our grandkids. Okay, we get it. It's a concept. But the world today is still unsustainable 35 years later. It's probably even less sustainable than it was when we first came up with the idea, which is even worse. And so we're clearly missing something. And even though a lot of thinking has been done, we have 17 sustainable development goal topics, just reading the 17 topic headings gives you a sense of how complex this is. And what part of my thesis today is that we haven't really engaged with the topic with the level and depth of thinking that we need given this complexity. And the first problem that I see as I reflect on this after practicing in this area for so long is that our memes and our mental models that we use when we're talking about sustainability are insufficient from moving from a conceptual thinking space into implementation in the real world. We've probably all seen these nice three-way models of equity, ecology, economy, people, planet, profit, with sustainability magically in the middle as this place that we want to get to. And that's okay. It's okay because it's a concept. It is meant to make you think in a different way than you did before. And John Elkington, when he was first talking about the 3 E's inside businesses, was really saying, look, you're not only in that bottom right-hand corner, you're not only a business that's out to make money, you've got to think about social equity, you've got to think about people, you've got to think about the planet and ecology. And so it's widening your scope of view. And so as a concept, it's okay to start here. But the reality is it's nothing like that, of course. Right? The economic E dominates, and we have to accept that we're working in this system that is predominantly based around a global business model. And so how do we change to react to the fact that the diagram looks more like this than the theoretical one that I showed before? And these are simplistic two-dimensional visualizations. And there's nothing in those concept visuals that gives you any clue about how to solve the problem. So they're limited in the scope of what they can do. They can do something, they can introduce us to wider thinking. And I like this quote from Bruce Henderson, which he says, concepts are simple in statement, but complex in practice. And then the concept is meant to be simple because it's meant to give you that aha moment where you say, oh yes, of course, why didn't I think of that before? And now you've had a paradigm shift and you can begin to move on to a new plane of thinking. But once you've got the concept, doesn't mean to say you've got the solution. And I keep coming back when I work with clients, I always say, okay, what is it that we're trying to sustain? If we're talking about sustainability, let's go right back to basics and what are we trying to sustain? And for me, sustainability is about life on Earth. How do we sustain life on Earth, not only for humans, but for all species? And so how do we build that into our thinking as well? And I assume that you're agreeing with my thesis that that's what it should be, but that's the basis on which I'm going to talk to you. And so we do have equity and environment and we have economy, but now in the middle we have life. We don't just say sustainability, we say life. What does life mean? And using a different word can give us more insights as to what that might be. I recently, earlier this week, I watched this Netflix documentary called Chasing Coral. It's from 2017. So it's already 5 years old. And honestly, if you're working in this space and you haven't seen this documentary, and if you don't cry at the end of it, then you probably should be working outside of sustainability. But it's another indicator of the complexity and the issues that we're facing, some of which are in communications. You know, the idea that it's only, we're talking about 1.5 degrees Celsius change in temperature seems so small and so nothing. And yet the actual impact when you get down and look at it is absolutely enormous. So let's think about this idea of complexity. Geoffrey West, the author of Scale, said, life is probably the most complex and diverse phenomenon in the universe, manifesting an extraordinary variety of forms, functions, and behaviors over an enormous range of scales. So we've introduced this word life into the equation now, and here it is, the most complex and diverse phenomenon in the universe. Oh my goodness, have we got a problem to deal with now? And just look at that scale. It goes from a billionth of a gram bacterium to 100 million grams of the blue whale. That's 20-odd orders of magnitude. That is vast. And so how do we build all of that scale of life into our thinking when we're dealing with creating a product? It's a very big and complex problem. Now, if I go back in time to the early 90s, when I was first starting out in sustainability, we had the Rio Earth Summit, 1992, 30 years ago. And most people have probably never even heard of this book, let alone the concept that was embedded in it, which is eco-efficiency. It's trying, how do we do more with less? How do we minimize and avoid and reduce our environmental footprint, which is presumed to be negative, by the way. And this became the predominant, this was the only business input to the Rio Earth Summit, the first one. And it became the mantra, and it's been for 30 years, the predominant sustainability strategy of companies. What I'm going to say to you is that it's inefficient. It's insufficient, rather. It's insufficient to the task. Now, this is a ray from the grave slide of me way back in the day when I was test marketing one of the first green products in the UK. This was Frosh. And over the subsequent 10 years, I worked as the director of global sustainable product innovation for SC Johnson here in the US. And over that 10-year period, we reduced the amount of packaging we used to deliver the product by almost 30%. And for that, we won the World Environment Council's gold medal. Because back in the day, that was an enormous thing to do and a very significant thing to do. But what troubled me at the end of that time was we're still not sustainable. We've done all of this thinking, we've done all this eco-efficiency. I saved hundreds of millions of dollars for the company. We did good things to reduce the pressure on the environment, but we're still not sustainable. And so this idea of eco-efficiency is, we have to get past it and we have to do more. If you've seen a chart like this, you've probably looked at any sustainable report from any corporate report on sustainability. There's usually a chart like this that shows something that's bad that they've decided to reduce over a period of time, and they're going to reduce, avoid, and minimize whatever it is on that left-hand bad axis. And the goal is zero. And so you can see why so many of these environmental efforts all focus on the goal is zero, because there it is on the bottom right, at the end of the time chart here, we've reached zero. I don't know about you, but I didn't wake up this morning thinking my goal is zero. I'm so happy to come and talk with you and Rachel and Sam with the goal of zero. No, that doesn't excite me as much. It does excite me to reduce all the bad stuff that's going on in the world, but the goal is zero, isn't it? But when I think as a scientist, I shouldn't be drawing my chart like this. Negative should be below the line. And if negative is below the line, then it should look like this. And if it looks like this, then what are we missing when we finish drawing the chart? We've been missing half of the picture if we're only dealing with the reducing, avoiding, and minimizing bad stuff. And of course, that's the more good, positive, regenerative, beneficial stuff. So what does that mean when we start using these 4 words to describe new strategies that we can achieve? And of course, we do both. If there's something that's bad that you know you shouldn't be doing, get to zero on that as soon as you can. By all means, go for it. But what does the rest of that chart look like? And so this, for me, is one of the second reasons why we're still unsustainable. The predominant strategies we've been deploying are insufficient to meet the scale of that challenge that we just laid out. And fundamentally, being less bad isn't the same as being good. You're still bad, just less than before. So we have to expand our thinking and go deeper. And so we need the paradigm shift even around sustainability. And it has to be grounded in this reality, this truth of the complexity of the real world. And so I put that in the center of my triangle. And so we have a problem. We've got to transform our thinking around this problem, and we've to synthesize it in a way that comes up with new and different solutions that hopefully can then bring us closer to this elusive goal of sustainability. And because this is a fractal, we can divide each of those triangles, and we can divide those again and again and again. And we can use this fractality mechanistically as a process to dive deeper on any topic. And that's the way I've approached my thinking around this topic, as a process to guide my thinking. Say, okay, so what's the deeper question on that? And then what's the deeper question on that? And so when you redraw the triangles like this, now you've got this group of 3 different sets of triangles, all are self-similar. You've got the original problem, you've got to transform that problem, and you've got to create a synthesis of new ideas around that problem. But all of each of those has a problem, a transformation, and a synthesis within it as well. And so let's start with just the problem. So the old problem and the old assumptions is where we are today. It's the fact that the world is operating unsustainably. And so now we've got to ask why, and you've got to ask why again, and why again, and you have to keep asking why until you come up with a better answer. And it takes multiple times of asking why and being hard on yourself and saying, well, is that answer good enough? Why again? Why again? And really push yourself to go more deeply, because otherwise you won't get past this surface level that we've been operating at. And the reason we've ended up with talking about circular economy is that we've realized doing this extra thinking that there's an underlying hidden problem, and that's that our linear global economic system, which drives the whole world, it has these many unintended consequences that we're calling unsustainable. And so now we have a new dilemma. When we synthesize all of that, how do we solve this deeper, hidden, and more complex problem? And so now we move to the top question, and we have to try and go through a transformation. And so now the new problem is how to design and implement a non-linear economy. And we have to do it against the backdrop that we're working in nature, and we have to follow nature's laws. And so when we do that, sorry, let me go back here. Going the wrong way. To do that, we'd have a symbiosis. We have to bring 2 things together, A plus B equals C. Right? We're to bring 2 different things together to come up with a new solution. And we have to go outside the normal circle. Most innovations come from outside. It's really tough for companies to work on problems themselves internally, which is why consultants have jobs, because you need some stimulus from outside to push and change and probe and to take you out of your normal thinking. And then the third thing to do as part of the synthesis is we've got to eliminate something. We've got to get rid of some linear symptom here. And so this, for me, I bring together the ideas of the circular economy and sustainability. They are 2 distinct concepts. The circular economy isn't automatically sustainable. I can think of many, many, many circular things to do that are completely unsustainable. So for me, part of this transformation is bringing the 2 together. And then what do we eliminate? We have to eliminate the concept of waste. The very idea that waste should exist should be eliminated. Because in nature, there is no concept of waste. And we'll talk about that again in a minute. And we're to do it against the backdrop of how nature works. And so now we end up with the synthesis, which is where we are today and why we're even here talking today. We have a dissatisfaction with the status quo, which is the unsustainability. We have some new hope that there might be a new way forward. We're beginning to reset the expectations of what's possible by setting a new standard, which is to push the boundaries of sustainability and circularity and bring them together. And we're trying, there are these emergent properties, which are new behaviors, new markets, new cultures are being established. And in the real world, we're trying to do this within businesses and prove that we can make it work. And it's a grand experiment, right? There's no magical solution because we would have had it by now if there was. So this is where we are today. And when we blow this all up, we have this, what I call the unsustainability transformation triangle, where they all come together. And in the middle, we still have life. Life is still in every one of those triangles. And in a few minutes, I'll fill in the gaps in the middle, because I haven't filled in the words around the word life in the middle, because there's another fractal in the middle. Well, what do we mean by life, and how do we push the questions on life? And so our current model is linear. We talk about take, make, waste, and it's unsustainable. But really, it's more complex than that. We take things, we make things, we sell things, we buy things, we use things, we bury them, we burn them, we throw them away. And even that's simplistic. I was thinking about Wimbledon and just a simple little tennis ball. There are 14 different movements of materials around the world just to make a tennis ball so we can enjoy watching Wimbledon. 50,570-mile journey to make a tennis ball. Is it any surprise we're using a boatload of energy, literally, to just have a tennis ball? And is it any surprise that we've got global warming and we've got CO2 going to the atmosphere at rates that are unsustainable? No, because if this is what's happening for a tennis ball, now multiply that by the billions of products we have that are all, which have all got complex supply chains like this. And you can see that we got to where we are through billions of different complexities like this. And even here, I found on the Food and Drug Administration a view of just canned tuna here in the US. A complex web of journeys all around the world just to get a can of tuna in the supermarket. So we now have to think about what is the circular economy. There isn't really one magical agreed definition. I think the one that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation have is good enough to work with. There was a European academic study where 114 people were asked for their opinion and gave 114 different definitions. The World Business Council for Sustainable Development asked a group of its members and reported a few years ago the materials, there's something to do with materials was the only thing that they could commonly agree on. Some talked about energy, some talked about water, but they weren't unanimous on that. For me, these are the three books that have influenced me the most. I worked for 17 years with Bill McDonough and Dr. Michael Braungart around the time that they published the book Cradle to Cradle. And it's this work where we think about the biological cycle and we try to emulate the natural cycle, and we think, well, what do we do with all this technical stuff? How can we have a parallel universe for all the technical stuff we have? And of course, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation has built on that, adapted the cradle to cradle model, created the now infamous butterfly model for circular economy. But although this is more complexity and it's getting closer to something that's workable, even this is simplistic because it isn't two wings of a butterfly. The right-hand wing of the technical cycle is actually in the natural world. We're doing all of this in nature. And so it's not two separate halves of a thing. This is why the blue side has to be done so carefully so that we don't mess up the green side. So even this model, even though it's more complex, still is simplistic in some ways. And so we end up with this idea that we have to do the green and the red. We have to reduce the bad of the linear, and we have to try and increase the positive and regenerative with new thoughts and new thinking. And Accenture a few years ago came up with 5 circular business models: circular supplies, resource recovery, product use extension, sharing platforms, and products as a service. And I'll just go quickly through a couple of examples. This is one from Scotland. A brewery, a small independent brewery, decided to take stale bread from the bakeries in the city and replace the grains in their beer with stale bread. And they came up with a new beer, which they call the Circular Economy Blonde Beer. And it's actually an award-winning, very tasty beer. Now, I'm not saying that this is going to change the world of sustainability, but it's one little tiny example of taking something that was being thrown away, eliminating the concept of waste, which is one of the things we said we had to do, and creating something else from what would otherwise have gone to waste. This is an example from Santiago de Chile. I was at an expo there talking, and I met a company called Artisan Roast. They were a little company. They just took green coffee beans. They roasted them in the city in their roastery, and they supplied local cafes and hotels with roasted coffee beans. And when they started to think about circular economy and sustainability, they said, hey, what happens to our coffee beans? Well, they make nice cups of coffee for the guests, and then the coffee grounds are thrown away. What if, instead of just coming back the next week with a new lot of freshly ground coffee, what if we took away the coffee grounds? What if we asked our customers to save the used coffee grounds, and we'll take them back? So they took them back, they cleaned them, they inoculated them with mushroom spores, and now they have a new product that they sell, and they put it back into the original packaging, put a different label on it, and they sell a grow it from home mushroom growing kit. Now, again, not an earth-shattering innovation, but it's one example of one waste stream that's suddenly been deviated into another product and another use cycle. So how many more of these can we do? Where can we see examples like this? Where can we innovate? Those of you, I saw there were some people from the Netherlands here. I know the Netherlands is a hotbed of circularity. It was one of the first places that Bill McDonough and Michael Brongard and I went, and it's not surprising to me that a lot of activity is happening in the Netherlands. But you've got repair cafes, which are trying to extend the life or the use cycle of a product. It's not really alive, right? A toaster isn't alive. So if we mend our toaster that broke, it's not alive. It never was alive, but we can extend the use cycle and amortize the energy and all the other things that have gone into that product for a longer time period. And in France and other places, you've got minimum use time legislation. You can't have products that don't last too short at a time. You've got to enable them to at least be repaired. Sharing economy platforms, this is a real hotbed of thinking for me. It's where I'm very active. How do we take assets that are either unused or underutilized, and how do we make them visible so that people can access them? I don't have time to go into this in a lot of detail now, but I'm launching platforms in different cities around the world to try and engage this. I'll give you one example. I'm hoping to get a major university system in New York, university system to take this up. They have 1 million assets, 1 million things they bought that are in warehouses in storage. And instead of using the things that are in storage when they want to create a new room or a new building, they go out and buy new stuff. They're paying to house things in warehouses that they own that they're not using. I mean, how perverse is that? So through the use of a platform, they can share amongst the 20 different campuses the things that they already own that they can utilize rather than having to buy something new. Leasing, not purchasing, another example from the Netherlands. I love the idea that Mud Jeans are experimenting and trying to say, hey, don't buy your jeans, lease them, and we'll take them back and we'll find something to do with the materials at the end of it. And we'll design them in a way that we can do that. This is the sort of new thinking that has to be applied if we're going to make these circular business models work. And Philips is one example of lighting, where now we're selling a service of illumination rather than selling your light bulb and hoping that the light bulb, breaks in a short period of time so we can sell you another light bulb. No, I want to continue supplying you with illumination. And it's a completely different business model. Now, how many more things like this can we think about? So the last thing I want to talk about is the third dimension. We're only talking about 2 dimensions when we draw our models like this. Really, this is a 3-dimensional fractal. Mathematically, this is called the Sierpinski gasket. And what does it do to your thinking when you reframe the original sustainability triangle like this? And I've been thinking like this, and I'll just quickly take you through my thinking on nature. Nature's fractal life cycle starts with creation, it goes through a growth phase to maturity, then things decline and we die. This happens in the plant kingdom and the animal kingdom. And then from a materialistic point of view, things are rematerialized. And this is the basis of life. So how can we use this fractal to begin to look at this? Well, we can think of creation as perhaps being reproduction. And then we grow, we're born and we grow, we reach peak growth as an adult, then we decline and we die. And what does it mean to be alive? This is another question. And these elements that are in the middle of the triangle here, these come from Crick's work after he discovered the DNA spiral. what happened here? He was asking himself the question, what does it mean to be alive? And he wrote a monograph about this. And he said you need clean energy from a free energy source, which of course is sunlight. You need a replication system, which is DNA. And you need a beneficial flow of chemicals for the benefit of the organism and its reproduction. So there's an interesting thing, a flow of chemicals. So we're talking about circular economy and materials, no flow of materials. That's part of how life exists. And so we can go back into this and we can take the fractal and we say, well, what's the creation of creation? What's the growth of creation and what's the death of creation? And we can use this mechanistic fractal to start asking deeper questions. And that's what I've done. You can think about fertilization, gestation, and birth. And then if you play this out, again, you can get all of these different triangles where after birth, you become a toddler, and then in adolescence, then you reach peak growth and you age. And there's a point at which death starts. There is a point of no life, and then we rematerialized. And here's the life again. And here now is the filled in fractal. And every one of these mini triangles here in the corner still has life in the middle here, where I've got reproductive cycle, maturity, and death. Life is still in that fractal. And it's three-dimensional, and it does change your thinking. I'm creating this as a model, and instead of being a flat two-dimensional triangle, which we typically think about, what happens when you pop it out? And sustainability is now the base. What does it mean to go deep into all of these triangles of sustainability? And how do we use this, again, just as a process to refine our thinking? And then you can do this again to finish off here. You can do this again with product design. We can create the parallel to nature's fractal life cycle for products. And we can think about design. And if we created a product where we design it, we make it and sell it, and then it has an end of its use time, we can start going through this and say, well, the creation of creation is ideation, right? We have to have an idea to start with. The sales part of design is, well, we have to design the features and benefits. And then at the end of use, well, we need to design in the design stage what that's going to look like. We have to design for the next use. And so again, we can use this process of the fractality of the triangle as a way to refine our thinking and ask deeper and deeper questions till hopefully we come up with better solutions. And so for me, the question is not how or where to solve this unsustainability problem. We've all got to do it, and we have to do it everywhere. It's who's going to do it? And it's all of us. And who is going deep? Who's innovating? Who's changing their design? Who's changing behaviors in the marketplace? Who's supporting this transition to what I call a sustainable circular economy? So I will stop there, and hopefully we can have a few minutes for questions.
Thanks very much, Ken. Yeah, fascinating things. There have been a few comments and questions along the way. Thank you so much for sharing those thoughts. There's some really powerful sentences and moments in there around debating, I suppose, the essence of life and a lot of those things. One of the questions, just whilst I organise and allow people to share in the chat as well, it seems that primarily, the design stage is that core moment of before, eliminating that concept of waste that you talk about. How do people try to implement this in their own lives? You talked about scale at the very beginning of the session and how enormous that is. What would be your kind of thoughts of wisdom and ideas on how you'd advise people make this manageable to their own work and what they're doing?
I talk a lot in colleges and universities. I've done a lot of work in South America in particular. And one of the things I've learned from that is I have to be super careful about how I introduce all of this work and this thinking in different places. And I think place is an important concept that I haven't even touched on yet. I think because all sustainability ultimately is local. I can buy a washing machine that was made in China, but in the end, it's here in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I'm living in my apartment. And so its next use and what happens afterwards is a local sustainability question. And also from a social perspective, when I work in South America, it's very different than if I was working with you in the UK or in the rest of Europe. The sensibilities are different. The social situation is totally different. And I have to be super careful that I don't come over as some overzealous gringo, right, who's trying to recolonize countries that have been already colonized too many times. And so it's really important to have a sensibility about this whole topic as well. But the question I get most often in colleges is, well, so what can I do? Which is another version of what I think you just asked. And I think part of it is to vote with your dollars in pounds and euros and whatever your currency is. You can't see because my camera is only focused on the top part of my body, but I'm actually wearing a new pair of shoes that are made from coffee. So I spent some money to buy a pair of shoes from a company that was a startup 2 years ago. And they said, hey, we're doing cool stuff on sustainability. Why don't you become one of our first customers and help us, get enough money to be able to realize our dreams of making these shoes? And so I did. And they've actually been the most comfortable shoes I've worn in the longest time. And then they recently came out with a bright blue and yellow version, which are not usually my colors, I might say. But I bought them because there's every penny of that price went to support Ukraine. So they're the Ukraine colors of yellow and blue. And so that's how I vote. I try to vote with my dollars. I mean, because that's the only thing I can control in that sense. And then I just try to think this way, and every interaction I have with people and through my work and my life, I mean, I'm doing what I'm doing now. I proselytize about this topic to try and get that movement to happen. So I think engage with the topic in whatever way you can. If you can do it in your life, do it in your life. If you can do it through your work, do it through your work. I mean, my earliest days in SC Johnson, when I was the manager of the UK packaging design group, I brought a lot of packaging innovations around environment to the table when nobody was asking for it. Not one person in the company, not one manager, not one CEO was asking for it. But it was part of my sensibility, and I brought it to my work, whether the company was asking for it or not. And I did it within, I broke the boundaries sometimes of what I was supposed to do to get done what I thought was the right thing to do. Sometimes I got my wrist slapped for doing something that was not within the norm. But in the end, I saved the company a lot of money. And so I got away with it and I kept my job. So you work within the boundaries that you've got.